Here we go.
Hey, Phil, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I mean, if I was any better, I'd be worried.
Yeah.
Not because I'm doing great, just because it would be weird if I were doing great.
Right.
What's wrong with that guy? Why is he doing great? What does he know that the rest of us don't know?
Yeah. What drugs is he on?
Right. Yeah. Then how do I get some? Right. Exactly. Okay. We're here. We're together. Kira.
We're here. We're together. We hopefully are with some of you all as you log in, trickle in.
We got Betsy and Leslie so far that we know of.
We've got Betsy and Leslie. I'm going to bring up the video. So we're going to hear ourselves talking for a moment. Okay, there we go. So I can see the chat. And
it's so weird how that works.
This is Are You There, God? It's Kira and Phil. And I am the Reverend Kira Austin Young, priest in charge of St. Anne's Episcopal Church in Nashville, Tennessee.
And I am the Reverend Philip Hart DeVaul, rector of Church of the Redeemer in Cincinnati, Ohio, the queen of the Midwest. Not me, the Cincinnati is.
I was gonna say,
I'm not the queen of the Midwest.
Like the queen city.
The Queen City. It's the Queen City. And speaking of which, I have not watched all of The Crown. Have you watched that show?
I am completely caught up on The Crown.
But I watched the first 2 seasons of Broadchurch this weekend.
Yes.
And Olivia Colman, who I know of her, and I've seen her vaguely in the background of things, and I know that she is apparently phenomenal. And when she won the Oscar, people were like, of course she won. And I just hadn't, she's just not someone, like, did you ever have that person in school that like they were apparently a great teacher, but schedule wise, you just missed them?
Yeah.
That's how my life has been with Olivia Colman. No
Until
longer.
You watched Broadchurch.
No, she took me to school. I watched the first 2 seasons. She is a magnificent artist. Like yes. She is just an absolutely killer actor, and I'm just blown away, just absolutely blown away by her.
Yeah. So one of my hot takes is that there are only 10 British actors because there was a point in my life where like every British show I watched had like the same 3 people in it or so.
Right.
And it's David Tennant, Olivia Colman.
Yep.
The Fleabag lady, Phoebe Waller-Bridge.
Who's in that show? Yep.
I know.
When she showed up on the first episode of season 2, I was like, oh, please. What?
Yeah, I think one of the remarkable things about Olivia Colman as just an actress and a person is that she's been in so many things that you almost don't realize how many things she's in until you're like, there she is. It's like when you buy a red car and all of a sudden you see red cars everywhere.
Yep.
That's been my experience with Olivia Colman.
She's stellar on Broadchurch.
Yeah.
By the way, Gary Oldman is one of those 10 actors.
Yes.
If he's still considered a British actor, which he's played Winston Churchill, so I think he is.
Yeah. No, they're
and you have to play Queen. You have to play the Queen at some point.
Exactly.
One of them, yes. Right?
One
so Judi Dench.
She's played several.
Judi Dench, Kate Blanchett, and Olivia Colman. They all are, and Helen Mirren, obviously.
Yeah, I, as you know, partially as an Episcopalian, partially as somebody who is just drawn to these kinds of things, do like myself some very moody British drama kinds of shows, which my husband refers to as All the British Babies Are Dead, because whenever he sits down to watch one of these shows with me, like a child dies and he's just like, why are you doing
this to yourself? Well, we watched, my wife is now watching it without me, but there was a point back in the day, we had us and our 2 closest friends back in California, we were plowing through Call the Midwife.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it was
also,
like
all the British babies are dead.
I mean, no, literally like how many babies died this episode? It was like, like, what are we going to do today? Like how many British babies died this episode? And at some point I couldn't take it anymore. I was just like, I just couldn't take it anymore. It was too much for me at some point. So, but she's back on it. Yes. Leslie's mentioning Colin Firth. He's definitely in there.
He's definitely in there.
They're all in a movie called Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. If you are a British actor of any consequence, I mean, it was like John Hurt, Gary Oldman, Toby, what's that guy's name? The little dude who plays Truman Capote. Yeah, and is in and plays the doctor in the first Captain America movie. Anyways, I could talk about this just as long as I could talk about Jesus, sadly.
Well, here, let me try to like translate this a little bit.
Please,
so one of the things I think is very remarkable about the crown and just Queen Elizabeth II is that she is a very devoutly religious person.
Yeah. And they've made that clear in the show.
And it's very evident in the show. And you know, for all of the faults of whatever, the monarchy and any other thing.
Yeah.
I do find it moving that she is portrayed and is in real life a very dedicated woman of prayer and you know, seeks spiritual guidance from bishops and whatnot, and is just a very faithful person, and I admire that about her.
I love that. I love that aspect of her, and she definitely seems like an honor-bound person in everything you learn about her that she tries to do. Whether or not I don't like monarchy at all, but she seems to approach it with a sense of integrity and a desire for it to be about something other than herself.
I do think that's what is attractive to me about the way the system is portrayed in The Crown, at least, and from what I've gathered from other from people that I know who are British or have some relationship to the British government,
right?
Is that, you know, I think that for us as Americans, that kind of integrity feels so rare, and so I mean, almost it's easy to be cynical about it, like, oh no, surely this is really just about the wealth of the crown, or
right. No, I mean, I've thought 5 cynical things since we started this conversation. It's really, but you know, I mean, I was sitting here thinking about the fact that you know, she's this, like most women her generation who are devoutly religious, she somehow managed to raise, but all of her kids are basically pagan boomers. So I mean, yeah, you know, she's a woman of her time.
It's true.
I mean, like, I've read things where Charles is like, no, I'm not Christian, and I don't really know how I don't think I should be called the protector of the faith when the time comes. Like, I'd like to change it to protector of faith. Okay, this is exactly what a boomer would do. And so I don't know. We'll see what happens. But that was rude of me. However, your cat is here.
Yeah, Wallace would like to join us. He's very formal. We joke that his personality is that of he's secretly like former MI5. You know, he's very distinguished. He wears a tuxedo, as you can see, and is the kind of guy that probably is carrying one of those secret sword canes. Yes,
that's right. So this leads to, first of all, I have to say good morning to Mary Osterbrock. Good morning, Mary Osterbrock. And we're going to have to check in with Betsy soon. Betsy had an MRI on her back.
Oh, gosh.
And her back is all messed up, and she's going to have to do all sorts of stuff.
Oof.
So we're going to keep Betsy in our prayers. And Leslie, who's normally in Canada, is hanging out in Cincinnati. She came to visit her mom for Mother's Day.
All right.
Yeah, and Betsy's got her 2 cats watch the show.
Oh.
So they're watching Wallace.
I do feel like in this time of pandemic, one of the underrated aspects of maybe having to do a lot of stuff online is that we have probably, you know, evangelized a lot of pets.
That's right. 100% that's true. Now, do you mind, can I have permission to be shallow for a moment?
For sure.
Those are awesome earrings.
Thank you.
Yeah, they're pretty great. They frame really well and they do the whole thing without being too ostentatious. Okay. I have a quick question for you, and then we're going to get to the main work.
Okay.
Is all the stuff we're talking about, like the stuff that we're into, watching all this British stuff and Anglophilia and all the rest of it, I mean, is it all white supremacist garbage? Do we have a problem?
Yes and no.
Okay. Do go on.
I mean, I will say that it is not the only thing I watch. I have been very intentional about kind of diversifying
Sure.
my viewing.
Sure.
Nor do I think it is like the only,
you're not like, it's the only real thing. I only watch BBC.
Right. It's the only real thing. I think there's a, having grown up or, having been trained in kind of the theater arts and as a music opera person, there's that strand of theater that's like Shakespearean acting is the pinnacle of all acting and
I was a theater major and I was never good at Shakespeare. So I guess I thought I must be second class.
Yeah. So I think that vibe that kind of can be an undercurrent to some of that is definitely like a white Western civ supremacy kind of thing.
Yeah. Flip side
is like, we just like what we like sometimes.
It's also just really good television.
Yeah. Like I like drama. I like
whodunits, and Broadchurch is good. I mean, here's the thing, right? Like it's just well made.
It is.
Yeah. I'd love to see, I want to watch murder mysteries that are set in all sorts of places.
Yeah, I mean, I watched Lovecraft Country, which is,
Yeah, I only got through 2 or 3 episodes of that. Should I stick with it?
I mean, if it's not your thing, it's not your thing.
Well, I like the whole like American Gothic sort of like metaphorical stuff.
The metaphorical stuff is cool. There's a lot of somebody put together actually like sort of a Lovecraft Country syllabus for each episode where like, because they're constantly kind of referencing, Nina Simone songs or Dr. Martin, Dr. King.
That's like that stuff I love. I love that.
Kind of political moments that we as like white Americans might not be as familiar with.
Right.
And that part of that show is what I found interesting. And as a kind of like springboard to, okay, this isn't maybe like for me, but like, what can I learn from it? Or what am I,
I need to get through that. I'm going to go back and hit that. I also have to find the right show when like there's shows that my wife and I watch together. And then there's shows that I watch by myself. Like, she's not going to watch Lovecraft Country. So I got to figure out when I'm going to watch it.
Right. Yeah. We do the same thing. It's kind of like, okay, we'll even start something together and eventually it'll come to a point where it's like, can I keep going? Is this
an us show or a me show? Right. Well,
like, are you committed to watching this together, or can I just kind of go ahead, and go on ahead? So
everyone who's watching this, priests are just normal people too. Just trying to figure out how not to upset our significant others. Just in which TV shows to watch. Which, by the way, Betsy and I trade shows back and forth. Betsy, watch Broadchurch. Full endorsement from this show. From me on this show on Netflix. You got this. And by the way, look in the chat. Leslie got her vaccine.
Woo!
How awesome is that?
Yay. We are, as much as it sort of feels like, well, like quote unquote, everyone's gotten their vaccine. We're going to celebrate every vaccine.
Every single one. And sadly, the numbers are showing that not at all everyone has gotten them.
Yeah.
And so we should absolutely 100% celebrate every single time it happens. I think it's great.
Yes.
Okay.
So what is our work for today, Phil? Do you want to introduce? We did get a question. We got a question. Email submitted question through the form.
Well, I like what you said. You said that this is the number one spiritual issue that people probably people come to you with.
Mm-hmm.
What we're going to talk about today. The number one, you guys, the number one spiritual issue that people probably come to you with, and it's about forgiveness. And I think that it's a topic that we could do a whole podcast only, just talk for a whole season just on forgiveness, and maybe we should. But here's a question that we got from someone. She says, hello, after much abuse and illness from that, I am having much difficulty making forgiveness stay. Stress or more terrible things happen, and somehow I am angry with everyone all over again. I have not lost my faith, but I feel like I can't practice it or love God well because of this. Is there anything I can do? Thank you and God bless. I mean,
one, I would just say,
where do we start?
Yeah. first of all, this is like I said, very, very common issue. I don't know the details of this woman's situation, but
Right.
the broad strokes of the situation are very similar to what people come to me with.
Yeah.
This conflict happened, this thing happened to me, instigated by a person, or ignored by a person, or whatever the situation was. And I know that my faith tells me to forgive, and I can sometimes kind of feel like I'm doing okay at it. And then other times I just can't do it. And it is disrupting my life, my relationship with God, how I feel that I can, approach God in prayer, approach God in worship, if I still hold this anger in my heart. How can I do that? Like, I still believe in God. I still, want to be, as the song says, a Christian in my heart.
Right.
But this situation, this anger, is preventing me from feeling like I can do that. First of all, I'll just say that, like, forgiveness is a very tricky, it's very tricky to talk about, because one, not all situations are the same. Two, forgiveness has often been weaponized in the church.
Yes.
Particularly against women, against people who are victims of abuse. And we have been told to kind of, well, forgive, but there has never been any kind of repentance or,
Right.
Meaningful repentance on behalf of the person who maybe instigated the abuse.
Right. No intention to seek reparation, no intention
Right.
to apologize, to acknowledge, to say, I was abusive, I harmed you.
Mm-hmm.
If that happens, and especially, as you said, weaponized towards women and people in marginalized positions, that you're supposed to forgive me, and it's oftentimes while I'm still doing the thing and have no intention of changing.
Yeah. And also the aspect of, like, well, keep this quiet because the person who's doing it is whatever, important, in a position of power, they're a big donor, whatever the kind
Right.
of, dynamics are there. Just kind of forgive and keep quiet while there's no change in behavior or change in all of that. The second thing that I would say is that forgiveness has also been kind of misinterpreted as, well, then you have to, like, continue to be in relationship with this person who has harmed you.
Right. And again, who may not have shown any kind of,
yeah,
or has shown some kind of quote unquote repentance, but keeps doing it.
right. And I think a lot about the people I've known, especially who, go through like a 12-step program like Al-Anon, who, have somebody in their life who is an addict, and their addictive behaviors harm the person, but, like, they can't make the other person stop being an addict. And some of the time, being in right relationship means removing yourself from contact or from relationship with that person, so that you're able to work on what forgiveness might be or look like.
Yes. Where do I even begin with? First of all, you said all of the things.
Yeah, I don't think I said all of them.
Well, I mean, you had all the marks that I was thinking about right out of the gates.
Mm-hmm. Here's the question for you. Why should we forgive?
Well, here's an even better question. I'm just kidding. I'll throw it back at you. I mean, I think from a, so I'm going to say something like, I'm going to make a really hard line stance, and then you're going to be like, ew. And then I'm going to spend the rest of my time trying to make it sound softer than it really, than as soft as I actually think it is, or as nuanced, I should say, as I think it is. Okay. I think our God commands us to forgive people.
That's true. I mean, it's in the Bible.
Well, right. And repeatedly, not like once. I think forgiveness, when you read Dr. King's sermons, he basically describes love in action as forgiveness. Like forgiveness is, you can't understand love without forgiveness. It's not like you love someone, then you should forgive them. It's that forgiveness is inextricable from the experience of loving. That you cannot really love someone if you have never forgiven them, because literally every person needs it from you and you from them at some point. So it's,
I mean, I think anybody that's been in any kind of long-term relationship or familiar relationship or partnership with somebody, like that's stuff big and small, right? That's like, you forgot to pick me up from the airport, or, you know, you didn't take out the trash like you said you would, or, yeah, I mean, we're kind of constantly forgiving people, right?
Yes. And then also for the hard stuff, the mean stuff, the terrible stuff, this goes into what you're like, forgiveness. You need to forgive people who do awful things to you. But we then need to understand what we mean by forgive, because that doesn't necessarily mean staying in that relationship. That forgiveness doesn't mean acting like nothing happened. Right. This is a point at which I like to remind people that Jesus still bore the marks of his crucifixion when he was resurrected, which means that he didn't pretend this thing hadn't happened to him. And anyone who saw him in his glory was still confronted by the reality of what they had done. And when you look at the first apostles preaching, they preached prophetically about how Jesus' own people treated him when he was there. So there is no lack of accountability, and there cannot be a lack of accountability. So going to a little bit of what Leslie's talking about and what you mentioned already, there's also the reality, as my wife pointed out to me, that trauma and PTSD triggered by being in a relationship with an abuser can mean very good reasons not to stay in a relationship with that is unhealthy. So I want to be clear that when I say forgiveness is commanded by God, and I believe that, I don't mean that you have to therefore stay in that relationship. I have been in abusive relationships where I have been verbally and emotionally abused, and by people who loved me and I loved. And I didn't think of it as abuse because I never thought, first of all, as a guy, that I would be abused unless it was like, you'd think about like someone hitting you or something like that. It was not something that I understood.
A barroom brawl or something.
Right. So it took time for me to recognize abuse in my own life. And then the thing is, but forgiveness for me, so then the question, the big question for me becomes like, well, there's a lot of questions now that are now swarming when you start to talk like this. As soon as we say forgiveness is essential, you have to, but also accountability is essential. And there are times when you have to stay out of relationship with someone. Okay, great. So then so then the question becomes, so what is forgiveness? Right? Like, is it one of those words like where you say the word so many times it doesn't mean anything anymore? Right? There's a word for that. I don't remember what it is. But anyways, to me, I think about God says, love your neighbor as yourself. Like that my philosophy essentially is that we are my understanding of the Christian faith is that God is love, and that God created all of creation out of an abundance of that love, that you and I and all of us, we are made from love, and we are made for love. Giving and receiving of love is the purpose for our existence. And so forgiveness is the thing that I need to do so that I can love the person who has harmed me. But what that love looks like is different for different people. It might mean reconciliation on this side of the grave. It might not mean reconciliation on this side of the grave. I can't go into a relationship. Back into a relationship where I know I'm going to be harmed again and again and again. But I can love that person. I just might have to love them from afar. I might have to pray for them and pray for myself and learn how to deal and sit with that. And that might be all I'm capable of doing. And in fact, on a recent episode of The Crown that I watched, recent for me, it's the episode where she meets Billy Graham. And she's like, do I have to, what if I can't forgive? And he's like, then you ask God to help you forgive, and you ask God to forgive you for not being able to forgive. But it doesn't, again, friends, I'm not saying this means that you have to pretend like nothing bad happened. And in fact, so in my house, when my children hurt each other, whether physically or verbally, not if, when, right? I make one of them apologize to the other one, right? Literally look at them and say, I'm sorry. And sometimes I'll make them say, I'm sorry for. And then do you know what a kid's like natural response to I'm sorry is?
No.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
And I've stopped them.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said, it's not actually okay. I want you to say, I forgive you, not it's okay. Because the language of it's okay if you've done something bad to me, it's actually not okay.
Yeah.
It's okay and I forgive you should not be treated as synonyms. If that makes sense.
No, I think that absolutely makes sense. And I think that's such a gut reaction when somebody apologizes to us. And depending on like the gravity of the situation, obviously, I do think there is something in kind of checking that gut response and saying, I appreciate your apology.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I'm going to leave it. Like,
yeah. Oh, I totally, so I believe in that forgiveness, as I said, and it looks different for different, if I believe that our destiny, it's not our goal, by the way. A goal is something you might not attain.
Mm-hmm.
Our destiny is reconciliation as humanity to God and one another. This is what Christ has done in the world. Our destiny is in God, and there will be reconciliation. I cannot guarantee that reconciliation will all occur prior to my death. And in fact, I can pretty much guarantee the opposite.
It won't. Yeah.
There are some people to whom I will not be reconciled on this side of the grave. So what does it look like to love and forgive them? In my case, it's to keep my distance and to remember the things that I love about them, to try to understand, by the way,
mm-hmm.
the things that again, understand where they're coming from, not so that I can excuse anything.
Right.
Right. And this again, we're not talking about excusing behavior or letting things go or not being accountable. We're talking about like it's like watching The Sopranos, right? Is Tony Soprano doing evil things? Yes. By humanizing him, you don't make the actions less evil. You make us understand and learn how to love someone who does evil things. And some people find that to be dangerous. It could be dangerous if you idolize that or minimize or relativize that behavior. But if you can look at it and say it is evil, and because I can see where it comes from in him, that doesn't make it okay. It makes you a more empathic, loving, understanding person. Is that making sense?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's really, our, I don't want to say our society, but I think we have a tendency we want people to be good or bad. We want to kind of divide, and we want to separate them and like separate the wheat from the chaff and say, this is a good person and this is a bad person, and sort of never the twain shall meet. When, kind of going to Leslie's comment, like we are all, to borrow from Luther, both sinner and saint.
Yeah.
And the way that gets expressed in our lives and in our actions may be very different. I listened to the You're Wrong About series about the DC snipers. And both of those individuals suffered, quite a bit of, the people who perpetrated the shootings suffered quite a bit of abuse, had a lot of, in their childhoods, and had a lot of like just awful kind of situations in their lives. That doesn't excuse what they ended up doing. No. But it does kind of give us this like, gosh, the way that harm and trauma and pain get expressed through generations and generations and generations, that can maybe give us some sympathy and some empathy for these just really kind of atrocious acts. And it's also not to rank things by like, well, they killed these people, and the grief of the family members that lost individuals in those murders, is so much more important than like their own abuse. Like it's not a competition.
Both are terrible. Both are terrible.
Test. And the more we can kind of be open ourselves to the grief and the pain in the world, like I think the more, I know it's made me a more forgiving person than I had been. And also to kind of see those, as kind of Leslie talks about, learning to forgive yourself, because we often do things that we like maybe aren't the best thing for us to do, or you know, and also that one of the things I strive for in my life is to interpret people generously.
Yes.
And I don't always do a good job, but that's what I strive to do. And I think like a good example is like if you're out driving around and somebody, I know.
No, that's when I'm the meanest person you've ever met. But go ahead.
But somebody does something and like cuts you off or doesn't use their turn signal or like whatever. And what's your first reaction normally, right? You're like, you
idiot. Why are you even allowed to drive?
Right. But like when you do the same thing, when you're distracted because you're coming home from a meeting or your kids are fighting in the back seat and you kind of do something similar, I know sometimes when I do it and I realize I've done it, I'm like, oh no, now that person thinks I'm an idiot and I'm a terrible person. And like,
I watched a guy in my rearview.
I
watched a guy in my rearview mirror the other day. We were at this light and I was red. And the moment it turned green, I turned on my blinker that I was going to turn left, which it doesn't matter because he couldn't have done anything either way. Like had I had my blinker on the whole time, he still would have been behind me. But I didn't turn my blinker that I was turning left until the light turned green. My bad. And then he realized he was going to have to wait. And I looked in the rearview mirror. He was furious with me. I mean, like screaming at me. And I actually just like turned my blinker off and went forward. But I was laughing while I was doing it. I was like, all right, I'm going to turn left at the next light because I have to turn left to get home. Mm-hmm. But I'll give you a lot of heads up this time. So that was my version of like forgiving him, because my gut reaction when I realized he was mad at me was I was defensive and angry. How dare you? Right. I want to, but anyway, so I get it, but I have been hating that guy ever since. So it is helpful for you to remind me that I have no idea what he's going through. He might've already forgotten that incident. And like, I would have been him if I was in the right mood. Right. I'm the same person.
Yeah.
I have another big thing I want to say about this, but I want to take a step back and I want to look at, what Leslie's writing here on the side. You've addressed it a little bit already, but the idea, first of all, of we need to forgive ourselves and ask for forgiveness ourselves. But I think this thing she says, when she was a kid, I threw a wooden block at my sister when I was little and I was mad at her. And I remember my mom saying, I don't just need to ask her for forgiveness. I need to ask for God's forgiveness and my own too. This was in conjunction with a forgiveness exercise from Redeemer Sunday School. I love hearing about that. But so hold on a sec. We've been talking about forgiveness in terms of our actions towards other people, which is important. That's right. And I've mentioned God commands it, because that's my style. But also, there is this thing that we've seen in several parts in scriptures that every sin, anything we do when I sin against someone else, it is actually a sin against God.
Yeah.
And the idea is that if you are made by God and you are God's beloved, and I do something that compromises the truth of that or demeans or detracts from the truth of your belovedness and belongingness to God, if I contribute to your being taken out of right relationship with God and with others, then that is a sin against the one who made you. Then I've got to apologize to you, but I also do need to ask forgiveness to God, because when I harm others, I am disrespecting God's creation. And that's an interesting, that's just a piece of this that we don't always think about, right? That all of our sins are against God, even the ones that are against one another.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like, oh, if God finds out what I did to Kira, he's going to be really mad at me, right? It's like,
First of all, God knows.
right. First of all, God knows. Secondly, like, it's not about getting in trouble. It's about like, it's about what it does to all of us, including God, because God is in it with us.
Yeah, I think that here's a liturgical opinion. The Litany of Repentance in our Ash Wednesday liturgy is really, really good, and I wish we used it more often.
Yeah,
And
not just Ash Wednesday.
I think there should be more usage of that litany, because it really just covers the whole gamut of things that we might have done and left undone.
So on top of our conversation from last week with Rogation Days and Ember Days,
yeah.
Are there days of penitence where we can just throw that in?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely are. I mean, I think Ember Days would be one of them.
I like it.
Certainly, I think churches that maybe have a daily Eucharist, that would be a little bit easier for them to do.
Sure.
Because Sundays are always
all 5 of them.
Sundays. Yeah. I want to go back to something that you had mentioned and say that the other thing that I think does spiritual damage to us when we're talking about forgiveness is when we try to make forgiveness something that we like will ourselves to do.
Yes.
And that's a very kind of psychologizing, I think, of forgiveness. Like, well, you just have to either one, like you just have to let it go. You just have to not hold a grudge anymore. You just have to do whatever. When I think for most people, and including the person that wrote in with the question, like when we can't do that, we end up beating ourselves up over not being able to forgive. And you kind of talked about praying to God for forgiveness. Like all forgiveness essentially comes from God.
Right.
And so to pray for God to help us forgive, I think is where we start, baseline for anything, because we can't do it on our own. We just can't.
And like, for that to be a reality for us, what you're talking about taps into something that's really important to me, which is that forgiveness is not a moment, it's a process.
For sure.
Because relationship is ongoing. And by the way, that also fits in with another theological thing, I believe, which is that sin, while there may be an individual isolated moment of a sinful act, it almost never comes out of nowhere and disappears after. Mm-hmm. It emerges from some reality that is already sinful and true. Sinful actions are a part of sinful feelings and thoughts and overwhelming desires for things that we wish were different and something not being right within us. And so, like, just as much as sin is very rarely an isolated incident, forgiveness also. It's not like everything was great and then I punched a person. No reason, everything was great. And then I'm like, oh, I'm really sorry for punching you. And then the person's like, oh, I forgive you. Oh, great. Okay, moving right along.
Yeah.
Like, no, what was going on? So, and this is big, right? Now, you may have heard me say this before. Anyone who's hung out with me for more than a minute, like when I talk about like sin, which I get to talk about professionally. One of my mentors in seminary, we were looking at Romans, and he said, in Romans, Paul really tries to, I'll lose my train of thought when 2 cardinals land right in front of my window.
I know. Okay, I am also very distracted by birds right now. Not right now.
No, but I hear you.
Generally,
2 of them, and they're clearly a male and female, and they're hanging out together. It's pretty fantastic. He said Paul in Romans tries to get across the idea that sin is not just you kicking the dog. Mm-hmm. Sin is the force that makes you want to kick the dog.
Right. It's your anger. It's your desire for control. It's whatever know.
So forgiveness likewise is going to be a process, and there may be a need for that moment of catharsis of a person apologizing and you saying, I forgive you. And then you have to spend your time actually living into that thing. That moment may be really important, really transformative, and really helpful, but then you need to but something has to come after that. right? So I think that's an important part for me. There's still something that we haven't addressed yet that I find that is actually directly to what our question asker asked, right? And that is, she says, and I want to get it right. Somehow I am angry with everyone all over again. And then she sort of beats herself up for that. I've not lost my faith, but I feel like I can't practice it or love God well because of this, etc. Right? So here's the thing that I think is really, really important. And this is again something specifically that it seems to me in my anecdotal evidence that this affects women disproportionately to the way it affects men in our culture. Anger is not bad. Anger is not bad. And women are taught to not to ever to be angry, mainly because they're told it's unattractive or that they're not behaving appropriately. But anger is a sign that something is wrong.
Right.
And you don't want to live in anger. You don't want to act out of anger. You mentioned that earlier, and Leslie mentioned, you want to be a Green Lantern, not a Red Lantern. Like, obviously, very true. Who wants to be the Red Lantern? That's no good. But like anger in it, and you don't want to live in anger. You don't want to be fueled by anger. You don't want to that doesn't want to be where you make your home.
Yes.
However, anger is a sign, a very oftentimes a very healthy sign that you are being harmed. And paying attention to that anger is important. So if you are out of that situation of abuse and you've done the work of trying to forgive, but anger shows back up, your instinct is to feel guilty about that anger because you think, I thought I was over this. I thought I was better than this. I don't ever want to feel this. So first thing I want to remind you is that God gets angry. And we've talked about that on this show before, but God gets angry because God sees God's children being harmed, abused, neglected, marginalized, oppressed, and that's not okay. God's anger comes from a healthy perspective of seeing things that are not okay, that are bad happening.
Yeah.
So I just want to say that anger can be helpful because it can make us realize that there's something wrong, and we need to acknowledge that. If you've gotten away from the abuse and you're in the midst of recovering from that and you're working on forgiveness and all that stuff, and you find yourself angry again, your gut reaction is to judge yourself for it, or to go down that rabbit hole and like hate that person all over again, and that's so hard. But what if in the moment you just were able to look at step outside of yourself. I do this in maybe more than a person is supposed to step outside of myself, but step outside of yourself and look at the anger. Don't judge the anger, either good or bad. Don't say it's good. Don't say it's bad. Neither. Don't hate yourself for being angry or love the anger. Just, I'm angry.
Yeah. I like the phrase of getting curious about.
Thank you. That's fantastic.
About the anger.
What would it look like to be curious about why that anger shows up? Is it the same thing that I get triggered by every time? Where's the anger? What made me angry in this situation? Was it angry just thinking about allow yourself? That is fantastic language, Kira, because if we allow ourselves to be curious about that anger, it might help us sort of unravel or peel back a little bit more of where the actual injury is. And once we understand that, the more we understand that, the more we can seek healing from God around those things. So I just want to say, you don't want to live in anger. You don't want to make decisions out of anger. But I also don't want us to be ashamed of anger.
Yeah, I think that's a really important close reading of the question that got sent to us, because I would have kind of totally not skipped over it, but I think that is a really important thing to address, especially coming from somebody who, based on their name and the question, I assume is also a woman. And I definitely, it's taken me a long time to get comfortable with feeling angry and what that even feels like in my body and how that expresses itself in my physical being.
Yeah.
And to not judge myself for it. To kind of piggyback on what you were saying, anger, of course, can be a really energizing force.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, you may not want to like make important decisions like when you're in that really hot space.
Yeah.
But you know, I mean, there is such a thing as righteous anger. Like, and you look at the world when you see injustice, when you see somebody being mistreated or oppressed, like you should get angry.
Right.
Like, and if that person is you, yeah, you should be angry that, you know, somebody is treating you that way.
Right.
And that's a totally fair and legitimate thing to feel.
Yep.
And we really have, so many of us, I mean, men and women alike, have been socialized to not be angry or to express that anger physically or whatever in kind of unhelpful ways. You know?
I agree. I agree. And I think we connect anger to violence, and violence is scary. Like, I've already mentioned his name, but like, I mean, like, you know, Martin Luther King Jr. gets used a lot by white people to say that's the kind of thing you should do. Although white people by and large hated him when he was alive.
Right.
He was angry. He was nonviolent and angry. Like that he was like, I don't believe in violence. And also these things are wrong and I'm not going to stop talking about it.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. And the way, I mean, we also don't like the way Black people or other people of color get angry.
Right. Get it. You're allowed to be angry. No, not like that.
Yeah.
And I'm guilty. I'm definitely guilty of that. I'm more guilty of that with, I think more. I was definitely guilty of that racially. I probably still am, but I used to be much more guilty of it. I was definitely into tone policing growing up. I definitely was like, oh, I would totally be fine with what you have to say if you could just say it differently. But now I just mostly just do that with women, and I have to work on that. Like I like, it's totally. I recognize it. Like when I'm like, if a woman's angry, near me, towards me, my first reaction is defensiveness and like, well, wait a minute, right?
Yeah.
And it always comes back to, by the way, when you make someone angry, but I'm a good person. Which, here's the thing, no, you're not. Like, I'm not that good a person. Like, I'm a person is what I am.
Yeah.
So I get it right and I get it wrong, both. And so I'm trying to be attentive to like when someone gets angry.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
to pay attention to my feelings about that.
That's definitely fair, because like, I think especially in close relationships, we often get angry near each other. And like, sometimes I have to say to my husband, like, I'm angry, but I'm not angry at you, but I need to
my wife and I have this
yell about it.
Why are you mad? What have I done?
Yeah.
No, I'm just in a bad mood. The funny thing is, then you're like, it's going to be about you in a second if you don't back up, because this bad mood is alive. Like, this is a living, breathing bad mood. And that goes both ways. We're both like this, like, this thing's bothering me. And then I'm like, am I bothering you? Well, you asked that question, so now yes, but before you weren't. So it's very tricky territory. And but so this is good stuff. I want to go back here. Leslie mentions something about self-hatred and the need to forgive ourselves. A lot of people hate themselves. They think they are terrible people. They are unlovable because they have a really hard time forgiving themselves for things they may have done or thought of. God hates them because they've messed up and they're going to hell anyway, so why even try? And all of this. And I know it's, as she says, I know it's patently untrue, but it took a lot of therapy. It does take a lot of therapy, and it takes good. If you're a Christian and you're bringing God into the equation like we do, it requires better theology than maybe we had. Because
I think a lot of people, and I hope people at my church don't get this, but in their spiritual upbringings, in their churches, internalize this message as children, like at a very, very young age, that they are like sinful and bad and can never do enough to kind of please God. And that's also really dangerous, because then what does it matter if I do this horrible thing? Like, I'm already a bad person. O.J. Simpson say something similar.
Really?
Like, it was after he'd been arrested, I think maybe this most recent time. And, after this after everything that he's done, he just kind of was like, at this point, like, I'm just a bad person. So what does it matter if I kind of like do some crimes? Like, everybody thinks I killed Nicole. Like,
So I might as well be bad. I might as well be a villain.
I'm never gonna like get my kind of old life back. And
that, I think, shows the need for forgiveness exists within a context of our relationship with God and one another. And so we never want to get to a place where we think that we are not loved by God, that we're not belonging, because then we go to that place where nothing matters.
Yeah. And that's a really, like, that nihilism is really tempting sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Like, nothing matters. It's all just whatever. I'm too far down the rabbit hole to kind of turn my life around or start making, amends with people. Like, might as well just kind of keep going on this train.
My problem, I said, oh yeah, like I knew what I was talking about because I've seen it with other people, but that's never been my problem. My problem is always that I think my problem is never that I think nothing matters. My problem is that I think everything matters, which is its own kind of exhaustion. But I wanted to say, I have a really, I can be very frustrating with people in terms, well, I could just stop there. I can be really frustrated with people, but I can be really frustrating with people about Christianity, including my own parishioners, because the idea, like, people want to be like, oh, these Christians think that we're all bad people, but I think we're all good people. And I'm like, I actually think you're both wrong. I don't think we're bad. I don't think we're good. I think we're people.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important, like, for me, people are capable of evil and good. Period. All people, every single person you meet is capable of evil and good. And so to me, so that is not like the idea of like that, what we try to create, and you mentioned this earlier, is the competition. We try to create this idea that there's a debit credit line. And if you do enough bad things, you're in the red. And if you do enough good things, you're in the black. But God loves us. Full stop. And is in relationship with us, full stop. So the question just becomes not, are we good or bad? It is, are we responding to that? Are we living into that?
Are we living out of our belovedness?
Yeah, right. Into and out of and into. Yes. And to the degree that we are not, we ask for forgiveness. And to the degree that we are, we say, this is wonderful. It's giving me more life. But I just, like, the whole bad person, good person stuff, I think, is a false dichotomy that doesn't, like, help anything. And so I get in trouble with my friends that want to say that everyone's good or everyone's worthy, but because I'm like, well, I don't buy that. But I get in trouble with our Christian friends also, who are like, no, we're all bad, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't believe that either. Like, if God loves me, then I'm loved. And God's not wrong about me. Like, that's the thing I want to say to everybody all the time. God's not wrong about you. Like, if God loves you,
yeah,
who am I to say God doesn't know what she's talking about? Like, how do I get to do that? Right? Yeah. So, okay, we've got a few minutes left. We're going to stop for now. We may talk more about forgiveness in the future. And of course, there's the apology conversation. Leslie talks about when talking to customer service, I apologize a lot. I'm frustrated and angry, but I think, anytime we can let the customer service person know that we're not mad at them directly, we're helping, we're being better people. And we're also, like, making their lives just that much less terrible.
Right. Yeah. Depending on how frustrating the situation or what kind of mood I'm in, I have found that, honey attracts a lot more, flies than vinegar does in terms of sort of getting help and having people go above and beyond and stuff like that. So as difficult as that sometimes is. So real quick, I after this conversation, I'm going to meet with a local news person because a man recently has been in the news. He was arrested after he assaulted several people in an elevator at a hospital, several nurses. Hit them When his photo came up on the news, I recognized him as the man that physically assaulted me outside of my apartment a couple of years ago. And it wasn't a bad assault. Like, I don't want to kind of like make excuses for it. It still was a violation of my person. And I kind of said something about it. Anyways, it turns out he was released from custody, and because he has a neurocognitive disorder and condition that cannot be improved, he is not mentally competent enough to stand trial. So he has been turned out back onto the streets.
Right.
And I first was angry about it, and then I sort of was looking at the situation, and I was like, this is just so sad that there is no safe place for this person to go that is safe for him, that is safe for the community. And
it's jail. It's jail or the streets.
It's jail, the hospital, or the streets. And what a failure of us as a society. And I was telling my husband this, and he was like, wow, you're being very gracious about this.
Well, you are, but that's because you were made to be gracious.
Well, I told the news person who I'm meeting with, I was like, I do not want to meet with you if the focus of this story is about demonizing this man.
Yeah.
Like, I do not want to tell my story to make him out to be a bad person. He is a sick person.
Yeah.
And he needs to be kept safe so that the rest of us can be kept safe.
Yeah.
And like, we're not doing that.
I think that the kind of love that you're describing and the kind of graciousness and forgiveness that's coming out of you right now is like literally why we are meant to be on this earth. Like, this is what we're taught. This is how we're meant to love. And it's not simple. It's not easy. It's complicated and it's messy, and it's an acknowledgement of something, you know, as you said, like deeply holy within that other person and deeply flawed around the world and around our society that we've constructed and participated in, right? We're complicit, you know, and there's so much there. Well, I'm sorry that you have to, I think it's great that you will be able to advocate for him today. Yeah,
I pray for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, yes, that's right. I will pray for you for sure. And I'm so glad that you're doing that. Oh my goodness, Kira. Now I can't even ask you what music you're listening to. Everything I say now sounds just shallow and dismissive.
What have I been listening to? Oh gosh, I feel like I've been listening to a lot of like playlists and stuff lately, and not particularly like focusing on artists lately. But we are, I'm going on vacation on Friday, and we're going to the Smoky Mountains, and our plan is to just listen to Dolly Parton all the way, all 4 hours east.
Yeah. Heck yeah. She merits that.
She merits that, you know, she does a bunch of great work in Tennessee, makes sure every kid has a book every month, from birth until I forget what age. Yeah. And, you know, obviously is most recently kind of famous for giving a bunch of money to help develop the Moderna vaccine for COVID-19.
She's a living saint.
Truly a what Rachel Held Evans would call an Eshet Shayel, a woman of valor.
Yes, very much. So guess what I mean, you wouldn't be able to guess, but guess what I listened to this morning for the first time ever in my life?
What?
I listened to Tracy Chapman's first album.
Oh.
Didn't know her at all.
What? Yeah. Really?
I mean, I have literally, it came out in 1989. I was 10. I was listening to Bon Jovi and Def Leppard and Guns N' Roses and Slaughter and Motley Crue. A young Black folk artist singing with her guitar was not something that I had any kind of
on your radar.
Well, and I remember it existing and me not having any frame of reference for it. Like, I was just like, okay. Anyways, this other thing, like, it just wasn't there. And then turns out I went to the same college as her, and the person who signed her to play was his son went to college with her and was like, Dad, I go to college with this girl and she's amazing. And he was like, oh, come on. And then he listened to her and he's like, all right, we're signing her. But so then I got to college and she put out that song, Give Me One Reason to Stay Here. And I was like, okay, this is an amazing song. And then all of The college people who were fans of Tracy Chapman were like, no, this isn't real Tracy Chapman. This isn't folk. You don't know. If you like this, you don't really like her. And I was like, fine, I'm never going to, and again, dismissive, defensive college kid. I was like, fine, I'll never listen to her then.
Mm-hmm.
And then like a few years back, she did, when Letterman was going off the air, his whole last year, he basically created a dream lineup of all his favorite musicians. And one of the things that he asked his favorite musicians to do was sing other people's songs. And so this is where First Aid Kit did Simon and Garfunkel America. Tracy Chapman comes out, electric guitar, amplifier, nothing else. And she sings Stand By Me by herself with this guitar. And you can find it online. She made a single out of it. It's on her greatest hits. I watched that and I was like, all right, this woman is she's got it. Whatever it is, she's there. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't have picked out Fast Car I know her voice. So if I'd heard it, I'd have been, oh, I guess that's Tracy Chapman, but I didn't know anything. Mm-hmm. And then recently I've been doing this playlist when I'm putting the kids to bed and on YouTube, and that song showed up without me asking it to. And I was like, really? I didn't put it on. And I was like, well, this is a really good song. Mm. So this morning I just listened to the whole first album and I was like, all right, it's time for a deep dig. It's time for a deep dive. I'm going deep dive on Tracy Chapman in the next couple of weeks.
I'm jealous of you. That's like what an amazing, I don't know, to get to hear that for the first time.
Right? Yeah. By the way, this is a total sidebar, but to hear it for the first time, are you ready for the sidebar? I was at the grocery store yesterday or the other day with my kids, and I let the boys pick out their own cereal. And one of them said, like, what about this cereal? And I was like, I got to tell you, that cereal's overrated. Like, it's not that great. And then there's this young couple standing near me talking, and all of a sudden she's like, they're hearing us and they're kind of giggling at us, like me and my kids discussing cereal really seriously because it's the real deal. And then she points out a cereal and I can't really hear the conversation, but I hear her say, "You've never had Cinnamon Toast Crunch?"
What?
Right. And he and I go, I like look over at him. And now I'm in this conversation, even if I'm not invited. And he goes, I'm no, she goes, we got to get it. He goes, I don't need it. And I looked over at him from 10 feet away and I go, "Sir, you've never had Cinnamon Toast Crunch." And he's like, "Well, I'm 22 and I've never had it. Do I need to have it now?" And I was like, yes, you need to have Cinnamon Toast Crunch if you've never had it. Like, you actually need to have it. And he was like, "Well, here we go." And I just said, "I'm so excited for you to have it for the first time." Can you imagine Cinnamon Toast Crunch for the first time?
Oh my gosh.
It's like
this like flavor explosion in your mouth.
It's like listening to Tracy Chapman's first album as an adult and never having heard it before.
Exactly.
That's this thing's existed. I've heard about it.
Right.
I've heard it's great. I've always thought it wasn't for me, but guess what? Now I'm going to have it. Later on, I might listen to Tracy Chapman while eating Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
Truly a like full sensory experience.
Exactly. Do you have plans for self-care after this meeting with this journalist?
I do not.
You don't have to tell us what they are. You don't have to tell us what they are. I just want to know that you.
I not explicitly, but thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, carve out some time.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, my friends. As usual, we've gone over our allotted time. I actually don't know. We need to discuss if we're going to be back next week. Kira's going to be on vacation. So either we're going to do a rerun or I'm going to bring on a guest host. I have mixed feelings about a guest host because they're not going to be Kira. But we do want to, when we move forward, we're going to have opportunities to bring on guest hosts. So we may have a guest host next week, or I might just do a rerun. I really haven't decided. Kira, do you have any opinions?
I don't. I mean, I will miss you all next week regardless. But like, I won't miss you too much, you know?
A well-earned vacation, friend. Well-earned vacation. In the meantime, friends, send us emails, send us questions. And if you have an opinion about whether or not we should do a guest host or a rerun next week, let me know. I always take people's opinions. And Leslie and Betsy and Mary and Kathy and all else who were with us today and who are going to watch us later, thank you for joining us. And to the person who wrote in with the question, thank you so much for your wonderful question. We're going to talk about forgiveness more as we move forward because as Kira said, it's just an essential essential conversation. So, and Kira, thanks for sharing that tender story with us today. I know that that's not easy, so I appreciate the trust.
Absolutely.
Hopefully we treat it right.
Yeah,
All
I
right,
guess if it's going on the news tonight, then I can share.
I guess if you shared it with all of Nashville, you can share it with us. So, all right. Well, thank you all, and we'll see you all